started. Again, good afternoon and welcome to another Acma Fast Track webinar. Really just a handful of months in, and here we are putting together another webinar for you. My name is Peter Benjamin, and I couldn't be more excited to moderate today's session. Before we get to the meat of today's webinar, let's start off with a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and posted to our website in the coming days. I will monitor the Q&A. Feel free to ask questions, and I'll do my best to weave them in. Next up, our first of two workshops is just over a week away, and we couldn't be more excited. If you're not able to attend this event being held in Nashville, there's still plenty of time to register for June's event being held in Denver, Colorado. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming events. And finally, registration for our annual conference is officially open. And I tell you what, this is shaping up to be the best event yet. Be sure to register today. Now, before we jump in, just a quick disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed during this webinar do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Acuma, its board of directors, its management staff, or its members. The webinar and its materials are presented as a set of ideas and possible strategies regarding its specific topic and do not represent any endorsement of either the presenters, their firms, or the concepts they present. Okay, let's get started. Today's webinar is being brought to you by Optimal Blue. Joining us today is Mark Tedros, Director, Solution Specialist. Mark, welcome. Thanks for being here, and it's good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Peter, it's always great to see you as well, and excited to be here today with you.
Excellent. Now, Mark, for me, data has played a strong role in my success and really throughout my career. But not everyone is leveraging it for their success to better their credit unions. So tell me, Optimal Blue, has been a strong Acuma partner for over a decade now. And I'm curious, how would you characterize the role of credit unions, the role that credit unions play in Optimal Blue's strategy?
Oh, thanks, Peter, for that really great question. It's great to be here speaking with you, and you're always bringing these really timely topics and information to the Acuma membership, and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it. Optimal Blue, since its inception and really at its core, has always been about connecting the various counterparties throughout the mortgage ecosystem. And our goal is to help bring efficiency and transparency to the secondary market, through technology and true scale, really creating that true network effect and adding value to our customers. Credit unions and the mortgage departments within them have always been a big part of that Optimal Blue network. And they're really recognized within that as distinctive due to the nature of the relationship they have with their members. And so this all manifests itself in the ways that we approach product development and everything that we do, from pipeline risk management, loan sales management, to the servicing valuations we provide in the end, then in the data area and competitive data analytics. And I'll give you just one factoid for this question. I looked this up. We had 2023 HMDA data came out recently, and it shows that of the 2,281 credit unions that reported funding 167.3 billion in mortgage loans, 38% of them, representing $63 billion of that volume, was locked using the Optimal Blue product and pricing eligibility engine. So we really appreciate the credit union space, the important role that they play in our business.
Well, we appreciate you. Now, kind of going back now, you mentioned data, right? And data seems to be, is really at the bedrock of Optimal Blue. And it happens to be, our session topic today, right? So share with me a little bit more about how Optimal Blue's clients are using the company that you can provide. We'll say the data that you can provide to improve their mortgage lending business.
Yeah, great. I'd love to talk about that. Data is becoming more and more important over the years, and of course, Optimal Blue. Given some of the numbers I just mentioned, we've got that huge amounts of data, and then that allows us to provide tools and data visualization tools that allow users to quickly and analyze. For example, competitive analytics. It's one of our solutions, allows those users to act, not only analyze, but then act upon, that competitive data that's aggregated from loans locked using the Optimal Blue PPE, which is over 1/3 of all the loans that are locked nationwide. So there's really huge numbers, and I was just talking with their speaker today, Naveen. He said the data isn't just for the IT people.
Right.
People think that it's how you run your business, and
Right.
we help people to do that.
Right. In many ways, I mean, I've had many conversations with Naveen. It's the leveraging of data is really what's going to set you apart from the competition. And in today's market, understanding your data plays a vital role. Now, you kind of joked around and said, data is not just for the IT people, right? So when you think about, Optimal Blue, of course, you think the PPE, but there's a lot more tools within Optimal Blue, right? And so when I focus on the data tools that you have, who's the primary users typically of those data tools within credit unions or your clients?
It's interesting, and it's good that you put it that way, that the data comes from different areas. And so you might be looking externally at competitive data and using that for some of your analysis. So users on the production side of the business would be very interested in that. Certainly anybody who's responsible for the mortgage pricing and competitiveness area would be very interested. But it also applies to compliance, for example, and monitoring internal information that you are generating through your system, and taking that data and putting in visualization tools that allow you to monitor for fair lending and compliance, for example. So mortgage operation people might want to know, how often are they having to relock loans or renegotiate loans? There becomes many points that are captured throughout the life cycle of the acquisition and the manufacture of the loan. Members of the ALCO committee, people in the Treasury Department, everybody has a vested interest in understanding all of the dynamics of the loans that are moving through their pipeline, and using that data and using it as a source that is consistent and can be relied upon across really every member of the credit union management team.
I love it. Last question, and I hinted and said, it's an ever changing market, right? And in many ways, we need to leverage data to be ahead, right? But part of
Mhm.
part of the things that we have to do internally is focus on, how we can leverage data to innovate our credit unions, right, and move them forward. Now, knowing Optimal Blue very well, you guys tend to be on really the forefront, or really the front of the herd when it comes to innovation. So what are some of the things that you're doing to innovate Optimal Blue, and really, if you can share some of that with our members today, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, be very happy to. Maybe just to kind of level set. Optimal Blue employs today nearly 200 people that are involved in product development. They're constantly producing, iterating technology to support our clients' strategies. And we get a lot of feedback as our products are out there in use in the marketplace. So we really understand it and leverage that expertise in the market as well. And so some of the things we've done, it includes having moved all of our computing and data to the cloud for greater security, reliability, scalability, and making our data visualizations more intuitive and granular. So for example, competitive analytics that I mentioned earlier can show how your credit union is competing right down to the individual metropolitan statistical area, or MSA. And then within that MSA, it can show what business types are the most competitive. Are you competing against, another local bank, a credit union, or independent mortgage bankers? And you can see how they all stack up within the marketplace. And coming soon, so this is to the kind of new part. I can't reveal just everything yet, but we will be offering a competitive data license that takes the user to an even deeper level of understanding using perhaps their own individual visualization tools in combination with other data sets that credit union organizations may have. So pretty exciting stuff to be able to get that data even more accessible and usable for our credit union friends and clients out there.
That's fantastic, Mark. Well, Mark, that's all the time that you and I have today. First off, thank you very much. Truly appreciate your time. And again, thank you. Thank you to you and Optimal Blue for sponsoring today's session.
Absolutely. Love the opportunity. Appreciate it, Peter. And I know you're going to have a great session today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Take care.
Bye-bye.
As I mentioned, today's session focuses on the data points in the mortgage process, and it really dives into why we should take advantage of the information readily available at our fingertips. Today's speaker is one of the smartest people I know, and over the past few months, I've had the pleasure of getting to know him, and I truly appreciate his passion for data and analytics. I am pleased to welcome our special guest, the president and founder of CUlytics, Naveen John. Naveen, welcome, my friend. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm doing great, and I am no expert, Peter. I think
No.
I think it is. I have been in the data analytics space for some time, but the more you know, there is so much more to learn.
That's
So
right.
I'm
The
still
more
learning.
you know, the less you know, right?
Yes. So I'm still learning.
Excellent.
There is,
Well, for the sake of this webinar, you're the expert.
yes, we
Okay.
can.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, Naveen, I think you'll agree, data in general, without understanding, without the analysis, and really the application of it results in nothing more than a handful of numbers that make little to no contribution to our strategic goals and objectives. Now, thinking about the mortgage process, again, I think you'll agree, the mortgage process is filled with data points that we can leverage to improve efficiencies, the member experience. I know we're credit unions, but we still have to focus on profitability, among other things, right? Now, as I mentioned before, the understanding of data within our process allowed me to grow my mortgage division back when I oversaw mortgage division, and really helped us significantly achieve whether it's our monthly goals or our annual goals. Now focusing on today's conversation, I have a few questions that I'd love for you to answer, with the goal and hope that our audience leaves here fully prepared to embrace their own set of data more so than they currently do now. Sound good?
Absolutely.
All right, okay, excellent. First question. Now, we're going to start with baby steps. Okay, so again, let's first start with the baby steps and the process needed to adopt good analytic routines, right? Good data analysis routines. Again, you're the expert. Let's walk through the building blocks of a good analytics program, and where does someone start?
So, Peter, when we think about starting on a data analytics program, it starts with the question why, right? Why are you doing what you are doing, and where do you really want to go? So it is almost like taking an analogy of a car drive. You want to go on a vacation, and where should you really go? This is something that you need to determine, but the data analytics program can be seen as a car or a vehicle that can help you get to that endpoint in the shortest possible time, or in the most efficient way, or taking you through the most scenic route, whatever you want to choose. But when you think about the data analytics program for an organization, it again starts with your objectives. What do you really want to achieve? There are times where we see people making the investments in either the data and analytics technologies, tools, building a data warehouse, and then trying to determine where they want to go. And this is almost like putting the cart before the horse. It is not something that may not work for them, but it is something that may be a little more frustrating and challenging, where the organization, the leadership, the executive team might be saying, okay, we are making this huge investment, but why are we making this investment? What are we trying to achieve? And how do we know we will get to that endpoint that we are trying to get to? And that is where I think going back, when you are starting on a data analytics program, the important thing is to know your objectives. What are the outcomes that you are working towards? And then trying to go back and seeing how you can use data to achieve those objectives. And as we will talk about during this session, mortgage process as a whole, there are so many different steps, and each step in the process generates so much of information data, and how there are opportunities to use data. Essentially, when we think about the organization, they are using data to do three things: either to drive growth, or to contain cost. Our third thing is, how can they become more efficient? And I think that regulation and risk and other things kind of play in one of these areas, right?
Right.
When we think about growth, how can you engage with your members? How can you be in the forefront when they are thinking about mortgages? People who are already having mortgages, should you think of them as an isolated case, or you should think about their other needs so that you are able to provide them a more complete, wholesome solution?
Okay. I
How
love
can
it.
you determine more newer markets?
Right. That's exactly
Or,
right. So,
right?
let's kind of break that down a bit more, right? So again, you've looked at the mortgage process, and really focusing on data, and you've hinted at it. You've discovered that a lot is often overlooked or underutilized. A lot of these data points are often overlooked or underutilized. So let's kind of pull back some. Let's walk through a few of those points. Now, you mentioned, geographic and demographic area. You quickly mentioned, risk. Are there some other points within the process that have an abundance of data that we really should be focused on?
I think it is not so much about the data that you should be focusing on. I think, again, you should be focusing on what you want to achieve. But when
Okay.
you think from a credit union perspective, and when you look at a typical credit union and what percentage of their membership have mortgage products with them, you will realize that it is a very small segment. And
So,
that is,
so So
yeah, but
oftentimes in mortgage, we call that, our capture rate, our member
yes,
capture rate, or
yes,
member penetration.
member
Um,
penetration, right, exactly.
and so oftentimes when you look at the average credit union, that's what tends to be 2 to 3% of their membership have a
Exactly.
mortgage, right?
Exactly. And why do you think it is 2 to 3%? Of course, it is not like mortgage is a product like which you buy on Amazon, right? It
Right.
is something that people make those purchases once, a few times in a lifetime, right? Based on a very specific need. It is not um, emotional purchase. It is a thought through purchase. At the same time, I think in my experience working with several credit unions, I see that a large majority of the members, they many times they don't know that their credit union has mortgage as a solution available to them. So like there is a credit union I know about. They had a webinar for first time home buyers in our area. About 50% of the people who came to that uh, seminar, actually not webinar, seminar, they were members of this credit union for more than 10 years. And 90% of them, they did not know that this credit union offers mortgage.
Wow.
So just look at the lost opportunity. And I think that is, to me, a biggest thing, that how can you really educate your members about your products? Because people are doing those direct deposits, they are bringing their paychecks to you, they are using your credit card, but do they really see you as your mortgage or a real estate solution provider when they are looking to make those type of decisions? And how can you really be that partner so that you are there on the table when they are making those decisions? And I think that is a big opportunity. That is a lost opportunity in many ways.
Sure. Now you've also have looked at the costs, right? It's not just cost for the member, right? And although the cost for the member is easily tied to affordability and the entrance or the gateway to buying a home, right? You've also looked at the cost for credit unions as well, right? We can leverage data for these points, right?
Absolutely. So I think when we think about the typical mortgage rate, it consists of few factors. One factor is, of course, the prime rate, which is the institution to institution lending rate. But on top of that goes the basically the margin, which is consisting of the risk that the organization is taking, right? So that is so it is mortgage rate is basically prime plus margin plus we can call it profit, but there is some money that an organization needs to make so that they are able to reinvest back into the business. And in case of credit unions, that profit is something that is given back to the members through dividend and other ways. And then on top of that is their cost of doing that operation, whether it is cost of origination, cost of servicing, and all of those things. So they basically consist of the total rate. And data may not be able to impact the margin or impact the prime rate, but of course it can help impact the margin in having a better understanding of the risk. So that are you quantifying the risk properly so that people who are getting those products, you're able to have that right number for that margin. And then are you able to have the right cost structure around it? So anything that you can do to reduce for example, the touch points during the whole processing or underwriting processes, or anything that you can do to use data to improve the defaults or charge-offs is coming back to the business, right? Which basically means that it is getting a better rate for the members, which is a win-win both for the members as well as for the organization. And I
Right.
think that is where the cost becomes very important, or it
Right.
actually can be driven or used or improved based using the data.
Right. So you're saying leverage data to essentially establish good risk-based pricing practices for your current market rates, correct?
That is one thing. And second thing is to use data to bring efficiencies in your processes so that when your team members are touching those applications, there are fewer touch points, there is more automation so that people, a lot of those things that they are typically doing it manually, can they be automated so that there are less time. The team is able to manage more of those applications with the amount of resources that are available.
Now, I want to get to efficiencies in a second, because it's for me, the process efficiencies is something I'm quite passionate about. So I want to get to that in a second. But let's go back to you mentioned fraud, default, and just general risk, right? I know you and I have had a conversation about this in the past, where you have in your experience have dove into fraud, default, and risk. So kind of walk us through some of the data points that can help us reduce that fraud, prevent default and general risk. I mean, especially now with with looking, here we are, April 30th. The market's not looking too good, and it always remains true in tough markets. Fraud is up, right? So you have found that you can leverage this data to really reduce fraud risk, right? So can you walk us through that real quick?
Sure. So, and I think there are different types of fraud and risk and other things. But a good example is that when people are applying for that mortgage, they are providing a lot of information. And one of the ways can be to use or extract data from different. So in getting the data from their W-2s or getting the data from their pay stubs, getting the data from their bank statements, and reconciling them. Are they providing the right information, or are they providing that correct information? Because a big fraud is around the income
Right.
statement that they are providing. So are they providing the verifiable income, and that is consistent across different documents or different things that they are providing, so that you are able to identify some of those frauds, right? That is a very, very good simple example. From the risk perspective, again, from the default and charge off, having data-based model, because when a member is behind on their payments, or a member is likely to be behind on the payment, can you identify that? Are there digital or data footprints that are left behind by the members, which can find or help you identify who are those members who are going through some financial stressful times? And can you have a proactive conversation with them, whether it is about the loan modification or whether it is about other ways to help them, so that they don't run into a default situation, which is something that is going to be useful, attractive for the members. Because at the end of the day, if somebody is if going through the default process, it is not something which is fun and useful, or for the organization, not for the members. So how
Right.
can you really prevent that situation from happening in the first place? And
Right.
if somebody is going through that situation, or if they really need to go through that, how can you really make it more beneficial, or in some ways useful for the organization, so that you are better you are better planning for it, right? So something, those type of things can come very easily from the data. Of course, something we have done in the past, where we have taken that information from the transaction data and other ways to identify some of those situations, or predicting those situations.
And personally, I love that you use that example, right? The transaction data. One, because it kind of just reaffirms that there is a method to my madness, right? And that, if an individual member changes their pattern, right, it stands to reason that you should ask them the question, or you should make a touch point with the idea of, are we at risk, right? So, a good example in the past, if you had a member that always paid, I'm going to throw out a number, we'll say on the 5th of the month, right? They always made their payment on the 5th of the month, and you can show good history of that that payment on the 5th, but then all of a sudden they start paying on the 16th, right? Consistently. And then all of a sudden it bumps up to the 20th. Are you at risk? Should you make that touch point, right? Normally under 30 days, excuse me, most wouldn't, but they change their pattern, right?
I agree with you. Like, another example might be that they are having those direct deposits coming in, and you see that direct deposits not coming in, or maybe that amount being reduced for whatever reason, right? So those may be another point. Or people who are spending on restaurants or on vacations and so on, and you see a difference over there, right? And those are some of those things which helps you, at least, as you said, should you have that touch point, so that you should have that conversation and see if you are a partner helping them overcome that particular situation.
Right. For me, just thinking about, my experience, I always use data to kind of paint a picture, right? I was always a visual person, so I wanted to always visualize a process. I had to visualize a pattern. I had in my office, I had, a big whiteboard that had processes mapped out on it, lists of data points that we always would, strive for. But kind of coming back to, the mortgage process, and really, when we consider how we apply some of these data points in the mortgage process, efficiency is a big thing, right? Especially, thinking back, to, we'll say the COVID years, 2020, 2021, where, there was a refi boom. There was a refi boom, but there was also really a purchases. If you weren't closing loans in under 20 days, that borrower was going someplace else, right?
Mhm.
So Well, let's focus on efficiencies, right? I mean, you obviously talked about, capture rate. I mean, but I really want to talk about, the process in general, timelines, your thoughts on understanding the critical path part of the process. Please dive in.
Sure. So I think when we think of the overall mortgage process, starting from marketing, uh, um, the the products, going through that process of application, then review and underwriting, um, approval, so on. There is tons of data that is being generated at each stage in the process, and there are so many different touch points from the team members' perspective, where they are touching that application to review it, to approve it, and so on. And I think how data and digital can help them in optimizing that whole process becomes important. And as you said, that if you are like at one of the previous organizations where I was working, uh, a typical mortgage refinance process used to take about 40 some days. And I'm talking about several years back. And they wanted to see how they can be more competitive in the market, because it is almost like a competitive edge where you are able to compress that time from 40 some days to like 15-20 days. And I think, as you said, less time you are able to really get or close that deal. Not only that it is better for you, faster for you, maybe even cheaper for you from the resource perspective, but also it is a edge in the market which allows you to have a happy customer, happy member in this case. So we created one of the first dashboards that we created for that group, mortgage group, was essentially a cycle time dashboard, which was looking at different phases or different steps in that mortgage underwriting process and trying to understand how much time each application is taking, and then applying certain filters on it based on the type of application, the loan to value, the loan processor, and so on, to identify which steps in the whole process is taking longer.
Right.
And then trying to zero in and see what can we do to compress the time. So for example, if the appraisal is taking more time, what can we do to compress the time? Or if it is taking more time to get the documents from the applicant, can we do something to reduce the time? Because is it where they need to have a checklist? Is it a ongoing reminder to them? What exactly can be done so that we are able to compress the overall time? And I think that is a significant value and and edge from the organization perspective.
So I mean, the way you framed it up is that, again, you know putting my change management hat on, you kind of mapped out the process, right? And when you map out a process, there's different levels, right? There's level one, which is, a very high level, fundamental origination, processing, underwriting, and we'll say closing, right? High level. But when you break it down even more and go to level two, you hinted at, okay, well, what happens if the appraisal takes long, right? What happens if title goes long, right? So by understanding your process in general, the natural flow of your process, and then outlining critical path. And then for those listening who aren't familiar with that term, critical path would refer to anything that represents a timeline that cannot be delayed. If it is delayed, it impacts everything downstream and impacts every process afterwards, right? So that's basically what you're saying, is that you mapped it out and said, okay, the origination process takes this long, it should take this long, processing takes this long, but it should take this long. Same thing with the appraisal. You did that basically in your past experience. Am I understanding you correctly?
Exactly. And I think that was you're absolutely right, to identify what are those steps in the whole process which can be further compressed to bring the overall processing time lower.
Right, right. So, thinking about, again, my experience at my credit union, and when we broke it down, origination for us was a part of the critical path because if we were going to close loans again in 20 days, if the loan officer held on to it more than, we'll say 72 hours, there's no way we could possibly meet that timeline. So excellent. I love that you kind of identify that. I love how you walked us through that. Now, again, we're sticking with the process. Let's focus on process. Let's focus on, we'll say, that level one part of the mortgage flow. Let's focus on the data points in the different segments of the mortgage process. Okay. And so I want to focus on four of them actually, not three, four. Let's break them down by the origination data. And now origination data we'll say is from application to closing. Okay. Let's focus on servicing data. Let's focus on portfolio stress testing, which I think is interesting, especially now with a lot of credit unions having liquidity issues, could be an interesting look at. And then pricing and profitability, because that's kind of sort of part of this. All right. So coming back to the top, origination data, from your experience and what you've studied, what are some of the important data points within the origination part of the process? Again, application to closing.
And maybe if you will, Peter, maybe we should add one more to this list, which is the application.
Okay. We'll include that. How about this? We'll include that in origination. Let's just talk about all of it. Okay.
Yes. And if you are including that application in that origination, I think how long is that whole application process taking? And that application process, given mortgage is a complex product, I think there are so many different steps.
Right.
And at what step is that member falling out? Meaning, either they are taking too long to complete that step, or they are just abandoning that application, and trying to understand why is it taking so long, or why they are abandoning it. Is it because they didn't had all the information that they really needed ahead of time, or is it because they're finding it too difficult to complete that particular step, or is it something else? So having that understanding is important, because when you think about the origination, every basically any time that you put into that whole process of where people are applying for a loan and somebody in the team is touching it, but it doesn't go through funding, is a wasted effort. It is an effort that should be optimized. And the ideal thing is that if somebody is applying, you take it them all the way through and you fund it loan. And all that effort, you need to really look at it under a microscope to see how you can try to eliminate. Of course, you won't be able to eliminate 100% of it, but you have to work towards seeing how you can at least minimize it to the extent possible.
So really understand what percentage are you exerting energy that will be a lost cause, essentially.
That will be a loss. Yes, exactly. And that lost cause can be for various reasons, but anything that you are doing, and it is a lost cause not only from your perspective, but also from the member perspective, because it is an almost like a negative member experience in some ways, right?
Okay. All right. So that's kind of the application. Understanding your fallout is an extreme important, but also not just understanding the fallout, but why they're falling out during that process. So when you think about the origination data, again, application to closing, you're saying, hey, that's a really important one that you should understand, right?
That they should understand, make it easy for members to provide that information to them. Actually, it reminds me that this year when I was doing my taxes on TurboTax, it made it so much more easier for me to import the data from different institutions so that I can file my taxes properly. In the past, I had two options. Either I import it from a financial institution, or I input all that information manually. And of course, good number of financial institutions were there in that list, so I could directly import, but there were quite a few which I had to essentially manually input that information. And this year, it allowed me to essentially take a picture of that 1099s and then just import it. And once I imported it, it OCR'd and it took all the data points out of that document, and it automatically populated that form for me. making it so much easy. Not only that, actually, they took it to the next level where they realized that a lot of people may or may not know how to take that picture or they may not have a camera associated with their computer. So they linked it to your mobile device. So they said, okay, do you want your mobile device to take a picture of that document? And you take the picture with your phone and it is automatically linked to your application, making it so much more easy. Same thing can apply from the mortgage application perspective as well, so that it is easy for people to basically provide you that information that can help you in making those decisions.
Sure. Okay. So all right, let's go into servicing data real quick. I'm just looking at time. All right. So servicing data, what's some of the important points within servicing that we really should focus on? I mean, not including default, since in theory, yes, servicing would include default, but outside of the default risk, what are some of the other points within servicing that can help us out?
Yeah, and I think the servicing essentially is about on-time payments and of course, any of the delayed payments so that you are able to identify when people are not able to make those payments. Is it because they didn't realize that they are not able to making that payment, or is it that they are having some challenges? And knowing that difference is important, right?
Right.
So that you are able to, in first case, if they just forgot for whatever reason, it is just a tap on the shoulder kind of thing. But in other case, it is something where you really need to act on it quickly so that you are able to work with them in refining or redoing that application. So I think servicing becomes an important part. And in many organizations, even in some of the bigger credit unions, I have seen that when members are behind on what sequence and what's are you really connecting or engaging with those members? Do you have a way to know that you should be reaching out to members who have a higher probability or higher risk? So basically, before people who have a lower risk or lower likelihood of default, right? And in
Well,
many organization, in absence of that data, they essentially either go based on alphabetical order or based on some other order, which doesn't really make much sense.
I think you are correct. Yes, it does boil down to their ability and willingness to make that payment, right? And that's always the axis, ability and willingness too. And I agree with that. But also part of the servicing data also says, hey, when do we need to reach out to them for the next transaction, right? Is their credit being pulled by someone else? Did they place their house on the market? That stuff, that type of data can live in servicing, and we can leverage that really for the next transaction.
That is true. Basically, for the next opportunity or whether they are in the market for refinancing or things like that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So next up, portfolio stress testing. This is one that you specifically called out when you and I were chatting, pre-webinar. What about portfolio stress testing?
And that is especially for credit unions where most of the mortgages are coming from a um, basically a local or smaller region, and how they can make sure that whatever portfolio that they have, the risk is diversified across a bigger or a larger geography. So
Right.
that if a given region is going through some financial stress, it is not like their whole portfolio is impacted, right?
Right.
And that is where how can you really diversify that? There are a lot of different ways that are available that people have been using to make sure that their portfolio risk is managed and they are able to better provide the right outcomes that the organization is working towards.
I love how you framed it up, economic or financial issues in a geographic area. We could easily tie that back to, natural disaster risk, right? If you're in a high concentration area, or if your portfolio has a high concentration of in a hurricane or flood zone, something like that, you're putting yourself at risk. And if you're not understanding that data and looking to mitigate that risk, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, correct?
That is correct. And I think that is where, again, some of those other CECL kind of things comes into picture so that you are able to have that correct estimation of the risk that you are taking.
Okay. Last one, again, just looking at time, we're a bit over, but that's okay. Pricing and profitability. what's some of the data points? Again, you actually already hinted at this, that risk-based pricing model. But are there some other pricing and profitability data points that we really should understand?
I think we talked about that, especially from the risk and the operating cost perspective,
Sure.
because those are the two things that you can really optimize with the use of data. But as we started our conversation, I think there are so many different things that can be done. And from a mortgage executive perspective, it is very easy for them to either get lost or get into an analysis paralysis. So that is where it is important to identify the top few areas, maybe 2 or 3 areas, and start working towards that. And I think uh, do you really need a technology backend to work on those solutions? I think the technology is there to help accelerate your progression. So, for example, when you are analyzing the data, 80% of the effort goes behind aggregating the data, bringing it all together, cleaning it up if needed, and so on. And about 10-20% is really towards analyzing it or getting those insights. And technology can help compress that 80% so that you are able to get to those insights faster. But you still need to have a pretty well-defined business objectives or what you really want to do with the data. And before you really get into that mode of building the data warehouse or basically trying to work on that 80% of the thing. And I think those are the two things that you have to find the right balance on when you should invest into technology versus when you should invest into or what type of analysis you can do using your traditional means.
Awesome. Now, for the sake of time, I only get to ask one more question. But I think that this last question really focuses on one of the hottest topics in our industry. It's the general, pretty much a home's general cost and affordability, right? That's probably one of the hottest topics facing our industry today. Now, you found a significant amount of data relating to appraisals versus AVMs versus BPOs or broker price opinions versus internal value models. Again, this is the last question, but I think it's a really good one. Can you walk us through this?
And I think this is something that I'm hearing from people, especially around the automated valuation, where people are trying to see, of course, within the bounds of the regulations, because there are some very specific regulatory requirements around where you can use the automated appraisals rather than having somebody come in and do that appraisal, because that is one of the pretty expensive and pretty time-consuming process from the overall process and the risk perspective. And that is where there are capabilities that are available out there where they will do an automated valuation of that property that you are looking to underwrite based on data which is available in Zillow or MLS listings based on the recent buying, purchase, buying, selling type of things, as well as from the counties based on the assessments that they are doing. So how can you really work towards using that automated valuation systems in your underwriting process so that you have a better handle, better, not as well as you are able to compress the overall time it takes for people to basically fund that particular loan.
Again, it's really an assessment of, do we have enough data to establish a good value? I think that's what you're getting at, right? There's at this point in time, and especially when you look at areas that have older property, there's probably enough data out there for you to establish a good benchmark value, right? Even internally, if it's a refinance and it's been a multiple refinance scenario, internally you probably have enough data, right?
Yeah, and I think it also depends upon other factors, for example, loan to value and other things, so that you are able to make the right calls based on what particular application may be eligible for those valuations without taking inordinate risk, right? So something that you have to find out within your own organization what makes the most sense and what does not.
Okay, awesome. Well, Naveen, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for spending time with us. Truly do appreciate your insights, again, your knowledge. I had to cut a lot of my questions out because we just ran out of time. And I think I personally feel as though we were just getting started and really getting going. But again, these fast tracks are intended to be quick hits. But again, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I really appreciate this group and talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you. Once again, thank you to Mark Tedros and Optimal Blue for sponsoring today's webinar, and again to Naveen for his valuable insights. And lastly, to all of you, thank you for attending today's webinar. Your time is valuable, and we appreciate that you spent the better part of an hour with us today. We hope you enjoyed today's session. We appreciate that this 53 minutes isn't nearly enough time to cover everything on this topic. So if you want to learn more and continue to fine-tune your knowledge, I would recommend attending one of our upcoming events or listening to one of our podcasts, where you'll find that we'll continue to expand upon this topic and much, much more. Head over to www.acumen.org or our community page for more information on the latest updates on everything happening over at Acuma. Until next time, be well, my friends.